Okay, let's move on to ideas on how to build your visual library and improve your visual literacy when it comes to understanding and being able to reproduce silhouette, proportion, form, graphics, all those sorts of things as it relates to vehicles. So when I refer to your visual library, it's before you can sit down and start to create interesting vehicles of your own design, so much of what needs to happen in a vehicle is based on reality and function. And so there's a lot that's been created, of course, and so you can learn from that. And you can't just go out and take pictures. Here's a picture example from the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in DC. You can just, when you get a vehicle assignment or you want to create a new vehicle, of course, everybody jumps on Google and everybody pulls the same reference. But if you really want it to stick, I think it's important to get out there and start to build your own visual library. And the best way to do that is, of course, first, quick trips wherever there might be a great museum. But also, the way to get it to stick is not just to go out and take the pictures and then refer back to them whenever you get the assignment, but to actually draw these things. And so there's sort of 3 steps, I think, in building that visual library when you want to start to, remember those forms. It's sort of, first is the observed, which is, again, this is an example of, this is a scale model at the same museum. Here's a cutaway of a turbine engine, or turboprop engine. And when you get to go to a great museum, there are these fabulous cutaways, of course. I'm getting off track a bit. So back to the 3 different ways. So usually I start with the observed. Again, if you're not in a major metropolitan area with a great museum, or don't have the time or funds to go travel to events, then searching Google and Flickr. Flickr is great as well because people go to places like these museums and post all their images. So first, gather the observed and observe vehicles that you're interested in. The second would be to remember those shapes. And I think that if you're really an aspiring designer or a professional and you want to improve your visual library so that you can recombine those forms in interesting ways, the crucial step is to go in and actually draw some of those things. And then they actually stick much better. And then you can draw on those much more effectively when it comes time to design your own vehicle. The third step, so first is observed, second is remembered, third will be applied. So we're going to do that. We're going to look through those examples. So this, we're going to go through the observed category. So here's a great example of a shot that I took of a big turbine engine, and you can see all the piping and fasteners and what at the end of the day is tech, and how much, if you're trying to recreate the similar version of this or a sci-fi version of this, then it's important to get that level of detail. You'll also see as we go through here, I shoot for all sorts of reasons, not only to capture the basic vehicle, but also using different lens lengths to create different perspectives. Like this is a wide-angle lens shot, which gives us sort of an awkward and kind of funny looking proportion. But also to capture materials. If there's nice lighting, trying to capture that, in addition to details, which you'll see a lot of details coming up. And you can draw back on these. And the nice thing is, you traveled there, you put in the time, you own the photograph that you took. So as opposed to pulling all the same reference off the internet, you create your own visual library in photographic form that you can draw upon. So this is a nice example of shooting some chrome on the front of this old wooden boat up at Lake Tahoe. There's also a richness in old photographic documents, if you will, and you go to great museums, or even, this is a really small museum, this is the Oakland Air Museum, but they had some great photographs there, so I sort of shoot everything. So photos of scale models, photos, here's an example of a little biplane model. This is a great one which will lead us into sort of one of our other categories, which is the way things are built. Great scale models like this that don't have the skin on it yet show you the underlying bones and structure of the vehicle. which if you want to start to create convincing vehicles, it's very important you start to learn that. And there's another huge turbine. So lots and lots of tech and some wheels. So this is at the Indianapolis 500. I think Carburation Day maybe before the race, and so a little setup of concept cars. And so this is a fisheye lens, but if you shoot it dead center on the center of the wheel, yes, it will foreshorten as it rolls away, but it stays still a dead circle. So it allows me to get very close to the object and keep it all in frame. So shooting details, here's a little navigation light on a older plane. And so what you're looking for when you start to shoot these things is try to look past just the shape of it. Of course, you're looking at that, but you're also looking at things like, the scratches here, how this piece, right, is a cover for the internal mechanism and it was screwed on from the outside. All of those things, once you start to draw them, provide a richness, and those will all get put into sort of rivets here, and this was bent and formed and then riveted onto the outside of the wing. So if you're doing a period piece, a period vehicle, getting in those sorts of elements of how the object was constructed becomes very relevant. So here's a bunch of rivets through there, fairing in not only the wing to the fuselage on this plane, but, they didn't have great optics, in forming shaped glass and getting great optics. A lot of the planes of this era have this great flat windshield straight out the front. Then you might see this formed at the back. But there are lots of great details all over this plane. So I spent, I think, 3 hours at this Oakland Air Museum, walking around, taking shots. And you'll see, yes, it's they're not all perfectly clean. That doesn't matter. But you're after, in a 2-hour trip, there's a richness back out of these, I think, 400 photographs I took walking around that air museum that I could then reference back and start to draw details and understand those things. And again, with really the sole purpose of building a library that I could draw upon when I'm asked to create, say, an airplane, or in this case, say, a race car, right? And then getting familiar with the proportions. And this is, again, back to the Indy 500, and this is a great viewing spot where they go under the grandstands out to the pit lane. So it gives you a nice opportunity to see a car and understand the proportions from a different perspective. This is another nice example. Anytime you can find cutaways that will not only increase your visual library and literacy of the parts you're trying to recreate, but a deeper understanding of the way things work. So this would be really one that I would put into helping me to build an understanding of how the rim attaches to an axle, right, and then how the brake attaches to that assembly, and then the brake caliper is attached to the suspension assembly, how everything still has to move up and down with this when the suspension travels, and when that happens, what happens here? It pushes on this push rod, right, which goes around this little arm here and presses on the spring. So, these are great opportunities. So, if you really are serious about making believable vehicles, get to know them. Get to know the anatomy. Same if you're going to sculpt a creature, know the anatomy. It frees you up, I believe, to do much more interesting work. Racing is a really one of my passions, and very interested in race vehicles. And so going to events like this is important. And there's a richness and a level of detail that if you just walk through and you observe it and you look at it, maybe if you do drawings at the track, etc., you have a tendency to miss. And so the photographic record is a good one, and then to refer back to it. So, for instance, of course, there's the race logo up there. There's the name of the race, the name of the maker, right? And we're going to talk about all this stuff in the next chapter. But then there's something that personalizes it, and it's things like this. It's where the text has been written by one of the pit crew and the race engineers. Also, little mechanical things, right? You have to be able to put in the air somewhere into the tires, so you have to have a stem that pokes out and takes a notch out of that rim. So those are really fun things to refer back to. They have a great automotive museum there with a lot of the past winners, and so really great to see the progression of tire sections change over over time as the sophistication of the vehicles increased. Again, taking a shot off of a jet and how this thing was made, and then the fact that there are little panels with little fasteners all around them and little cutouts, and also informational graphics. Again, kind of working like a cutaway, and it's this old jet, and you can see all the internal structure. Again, more reference to, building form, putting stuff into my brain. This is the Beverly Hills Father's Day Auto Show. I think it was just from this year. And again, ridiculous, fun proportions, much more of a toy than a real car. Definitely, concept car of the era. But when shooting the shot, and I'm not showing the entire walk around here, but there's probably, a dozen shots trying to record and fully understand the forms and the proportions of that vehicle. Again, more vehicles, and what's great about an auto show, again, here's a period piece, and look right over there. There's, a concept car. So again, I just pulled these photos as examples to show that it's important to get out. It's important to start to record these things, and then it's important to start to draw them. So you have a better shot of them coming sort of back out of your arm when you're designing, because I find it's much, much easier to remember when you actually study these things and try to draw the details. It also really helps you with painting, is if you're trying to reference how to indicate all the complexity of the reflections and what happens on the inside of a modern headlight, for instance, then, really doing a study of this and seeing how many little reflective highlights there are there, the striping that runs around here, this sort of faux carbon fiber look around that. Same goes for wheels. So vehicles are incredibly complex, but if you break it down, wheels are a great example of sort of a product unto themselves, that there's a lot to learn there. How they fasten to the hub, right? There's a manufacturer's logo. There's the air valve, and then there's the finish itself. Then, of course, there's a tire. Air intakes, right? You can start to build libraries and folders of all of these sort of things. You could build a library of side markers or a library of, manufacturers' logos, taillights, right? And there's a lot going on inside there, but unless you take a decent detailed photo, right, you're not really going to truly understand the level of complexity. A set of old taillights. But there's a lot of fun stuff there, right? There's these things that need power, so how do they get the power? They have to get it through a cable. And how are we going to get the cable there? Oh, flexible, right, housing. It needs to be a housing because they have to protect it from the water, things like that. How is this thing made? Well, it's in a two-part mold, you can see, and here's the parting line right across here. So there's a little bit of flash, right, left over from when those parts were made. They didn't bother to clean them up. So it's that sort of thing that provides, knowledge about how things are constructed. Gas filler cap, right? A little over-center mechanism to really tightly lock that thing down. Again, more and more shots for all different reasons. So you can use this in your material indication, looking at a photographically, distorted reflective highlight, right, with the refraction happening on the inside of the lens and then getting that star pattern through there. Not to mention materials next to each other. Really nice, beautiful detailing there, and again, a very nice mixture of materials. But again, it's about learning proportions as well. So if I was to draw this, I could really start to study, what's the proportion, how much does this graphic take up on the side body of this vehicle for that period? And again, that allows me to build things that I can pull from in the future. Same thing goes here. If you're doing a logo on the back, and then there's another piece that has a logo, and then there's, it's holding yet another badge, which then holds yet another little emblem. Not to mention the beautiful weathering and scratches and things you can take off of that. Again, more period pieces. Again, learning proportions, studying, deepening your visual library, and ultimately your visual literacy. So you can go from this observed stage to the remembered stage. And that's where we're going to jump next, is into the remembered stage. So I'm going to be pulling from memory, and at sometimes from life and other times from photographs.